Good afternoon. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 27 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Patent Basics, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network in collaboration with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Be sure to check out the next webinar in this series, Trademark Basics, on Tuesday, February 28th. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session, Albert Wong. Albert is a primary examiner at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, examining applications in telemetry and computer input devices. He has been with the USPTO since 1994 and has worked in the Office of Innovation Development, educating independent inventors on the filing of patent applications. Prior to joining the office, Albert was a design engineer at Teradyne. Albert has a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and a Juris Doctor degree from the University of California, Davis. Please join me in welcoming Albert Wong.
Hello, happy Valentine's Day. I'm going to be making a presentation on the basics of a patent and the filing of a patent. There should be some time at the end for some questions. I will be joined by my colleague, Christopher Prone, which will be monitoring the Q&A. Copies of these slides will be made available, so there's no need to take notes. Just a note, the information here is for informational purposes only, and it's not intended to be legal advice. First, a brief recap. There are three different types of patents: utility, design, and patent. Today, we will be talking about the most common type of patent called a utility patent. And utility patents cover four different categories of invention. They can cover a process, which is a method of doing something. It could be a machine, something like a microprocessor. It can be an article of manufacture, like a computer, so something that's made by a machine. And it could be a composition of matter, so it could be some sort of chemical compound. The parts of a utility patent are the title, the abstract, drawings, background, a brief summary, figures, detailed descriptions, and claims. We'll go over each one of these things separately in, let's see. Okay.
Hey, Albert, if you go all the way into the red bar, the very top left button will start it in presentation mode. Yeah, that one should do it.
This one?
All the way up.
No, that's not it.
It should say start from beginning when you highlight it. Up above that row, there's a tiny little white icon above left. All the way to the left.
That work?
No, we're still in the regular, like you're editing. Keep going all the way over to the far corner there. More to the right above flat, or yeah, there you go. Does that do it? There you go. Right above that. Or you can go to the bottom right before the slide bar. There's that one icon. A little bit to the left. Right, that one. Nope, you passed it. That one.
This one?
Yep.
Did it work? Did it work?
No, it's still. I'd say just go ahead and do it like this. It'll be fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll be talking about the various portions of the application, which includes the title, the abstract, the drawings, the background, the brief summary, figures, detailed descriptions, and the claims. The objective of this presentation is to get you to be familiar with the contents of the patent application, the level of details that's required, what we call the enablement requirement, to make you familiar with the claims and the limitations of the claim and how they might be modified during the prosecution of the application, and the importance to capture the invention using clear and concise language throughout the disclosure. This is an example of an actual patent. Notice that there's a title here that's called Stoneman Accessory Kit, as well as an abstract, which is essentially a paragraph that describes the invention. There's also a figure drawing that illustrates the invention. Notice the numbers and the lines that indicate the portions of the snowman. First of all, I'd like to begin by talking about two types of applications. One is called a provisional application, which is an informal application. It's merely designed as a placeholder. And the purpose of that is that for someone who might not be familiar with filing a patent, the formal requirements are pretty daunting, particularly the writing of claims. So what a provisional application is an informal application where you can gather your materials together and describe your invention in great detail. And it holds your place in line so that you can file the formal application, which is the non-provisional application, within 1 year. So if you are having trouble, let's say, finding an attorney or in terms of the that's not working. Slides are neat. Let me try this.
Click on the slide on the left side, and then if you hit the arrows down, it'll be able to make you change slides.
Let me try something else. Is that working?
No, I'm still just seeing you.
Okay.
You want me to share this, do the slides while you talk?
Yeah, why don't you try that?
Can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did types. Here we go.
Okay. The provisional application is an informal application. You have 1 year after the filing of the provisional to file the non-provisional, which is the formal application. The non-provisional will be examined and it can become a patent if all the requirements are fulfilled. So why would someone want to file a provisional? It's important when you're filing an application that you be the first in line. So if you're waiting for to learn how to file a patent application or to pay for a patent attorney, that could delay the filing of your application. And if someone files an application in that interim term and they're ahead of you, they might actually receive the patent instead of you. So a provisional application is a very inexpensive way and a simple way of preserving your place in line. And it gives you 1 year to file the formal non-provisional application. Next slide. The first thing that's required is the title of invention. The title should be short and specific way of describing the invention. So its purpose is to allow the reader to readily discern what your invention is. This is followed by the specification. The specification is essentially the written portion of your application. Its purpose is to teach someone how to make and use the invention. And it's important that you use clear and concise terms to describe the invention to a person of skill in the technology so that they can make and use the invention. The specification usually involved at least one specific embodiment, and it concludes with one claim. In terms of the format, generally it's usually double-spaced and with a margin on an 8x11 sheet of paper. What's important is that the pages be numbered consecutively, usually above or beginning of the text. And the text is usually in a very standard type of font, like a Arial or Times Roman, that's easy to read. So generally you won't use a cursive or a decorative type of font. The most common portion of the specification includes the background, a brief summary, a description of the drawing, and a detailed description of the invention. It also includes claims, which is on a separate sheet, and an abstract, which is also on a separate sheet in one paragraph form. You might find when you're looking at other patents that there are other sections like cross-references, related applications, or even sequence listings. These are not required portions, and so if they don't pertain to your invention, you can leave them out. The background of the invention usually involves two separate portions. You usually have a field of invention, which kind of describes your invention in terms of the area, in terms of what it's related to, and usually it's followed by a description of related art. So in other words, it would have some description of things that are already existing, usually existing problems and existing inventions and why they're kind of problematic. So usually when you're doing an invention, it is something that is at least an improvement, or it solves some sort of problem. And the background of the invention is your opportunity to kind of explain to the examiner and anyone else reading the application what problems you're trying to solve. And usually this is followed by a brief summary of the invention. This is a high-level description. So in other words, you presented the problem, you presented the invention, and now you're going to briefly describe how your invention solves the existing problem or is a better version of something that already exists out there. Usually there are at least one drawing which shows your invention. And your specification usually includes a sentence or two describing each drawing, because while you may be very familiar with the drawing, someone reading the application may have no idea what the drawings actually stand for. So an example is you might have several illustrations where one shows the front view, another one shows the back view, and in the brief description of the drawing, you might say, figure 1 shows the front view of a bicycle. And other situations might be, you might have one figure that shows an overview, and you might have several sub-figures that show various portions of the invention in more detail. And in that type of situation, your description of the drawing would address each figure and describe what each figure shows. The drawings are very important. They're part of the disclosure that is required for someone to understand the invention. It also must show every feature of the invention that is claimed. I'll get into a description of the claims in a little while, but be cognizant that whatever is claimed should be illustrated in the drawing so that people can understand your invention. There's no requirement in terms of the number of drawings. It's up to your judgment as to how many are sufficient to illustrate your invention. The drawings are normally black and white. As I illustrated earlier, generally each figure must be labeled, and usually you label them as Fig 1, Fig 2, and Fig 3. The portions of your drawing are usually labeled with reference numbers, with a line connecting the part that's shown in the figure with the numbers. The reason for these reference numbers is that when you later describe your invention in the detailed description, you can correlate what is shown in the figure with what you're describing later on. So with respect to the reference numbers, it's important that each one of these reference numbers be given a label. So what does each number show? And in general, when you're using the same number, it represents the same part. So let's say you have a keyboard with multiple keys. If the keys are essentially the same, you might give them all the same reference number. But if there's a specific button that represents a specific function, in that case, you would give it a different label and a different reference number. Another portion of the application is the abstract. It's usually filed on a separate sheet of paper with the heading abstract. Again, this is double spaced. It's usually in the form of one paragraph and generally 150 words or less. The whole idea is to enable someone reading the application to quickly determine the relevance of the application. The purpose of this is oftentimes when a patent is issued or published, someone doing a patent search will encounter a lot of documents, and instead of reading each document in full, they can briefly read the abstract and determine whether the particular document is relevant for consideration. And this is followed by essentially the meat of the specification, which is called the detailed description of the invention. This is a very important part of the application, and it provides all the details to enable someone that is familiar with the art to make and use the invention. One should focus on the structures and the processes and how they connect together. One typically refers to the figures as well as the figure numbers to explain the invention. It's important that the detailed description provide a clear support and antecedent basis for all terms used in the claims, so that the meaning of the claim terms can be ascertainable by reference to the description. What does that mean? That means that any term you use in the claims should also be found in the detailed description. It's important that you be consistent in using the terms. So if you're using, let's say you're describing a keyboard and you're talking about the various keys, you should use the same term in the claims as you use in the specification. For example, you shouldn't refer to things as buttons and then refer to them as keys and then refer to them as switches, because it will often be confusing to the reader, and the reader has no idea what you're talking about. So the same terminology that's used to describe the figures is used in the written description and is also used in the claims. Some important things to do. You should describe the invention clearly to allow anyone skilled in the art to make and use the invention without undue experimentation. When referring to drawings, be sure to refer to the reference numerals for the parts in the drawings. You should provide at least one specific embodiment. Generally, this includes the best known way of making your invention at the time of filing. Make sure you include a brief description of the drawings, including sub-drawings if you present them. Provide antecedent basis for all terms used in the claims. So the terms in the claims should also be the terms found in the specification. And you should focus on the technical features of the invention. One of the things you shouldn't do is to use trademarks in your application because trademarks denote origin. I know a lot of times a trademark is also associated with the product, but that terminology can change over time. And so what's usually better is to use a generic term. So instead of using the trademark Velcro, it is preferable to use the generic term hook and loop fastener. Generally, it gives you a better application and greater protection for your invention. What is not necessary and generally not a good idea is to include information on how you came up with the invention. And generally, a patent application is not a marketing document, so it's generally not appropriate to make claims of future success or
Did we lose you, Albert?
Yeah, well, I lost the screen for a second.
Okay.
And this is finally followed by the last and most important section of the application, which is called the claims. The claims is actually what determines patentability, and it also determines the scope of the invention. What an examiner like myself does is we take the words of the claim and we use it kind of like a template, and we compare that to references and documents we find. And if all the words of the claim match up, then a patent is not allowed. On the other hand, if there are differences, then the claims may recite potentially patentable subject matter. When a patent is issued, the claims are used to determine whether someone has infringed your invention, which is essentially what people say, commonly say, someone has stolen my invention. So if someone has made a product that matches up with all of the words of your claim, then they have done something illegal, which is infringe your invention. The terms and phrases used in the claim must be very clear so that someone who reads the claim will understand what is actually being protected by referencing the description and the figure drawings. The claims are usually on a separate sheet of paper with the title claims. They're generally double spaced. A claim is written as a single sentence, so it begins with a capital letter and ends with a period. You can have up to 20 claims in total, and out of those 20 claims, you can have 3 which are called independent claims, which are claims that stand on their own. They're generally the broadest claims. For example, you might have one claim that covers the apparatus itself, and another independent claim that covers the method of making this apparatus. Each claim is numbered consecutively in ascending order, and while the claims may change or be amended during the process of prosecuting before the office, the original numbering of the claims are maintained throughout prosecution. So let's say you have 5 different claims and you wanted to add another claim, then that would be claim 6. But let's say you've canceled claim 2, the claims 1, 3, 4, 5 would stay the same. You don't renumber the claims if you've canceled one of the claims. So when you're filing a non-provisional application, you must have at least one claim. This is different than the provisional or informal application that does not require a claim. A claim may be written in independent or dependent form. The only difference between a dependent or an independent claim is that a dependent claim will refer to a claim that's previously been presented. It's just essentially a shorthand way of writing an independent claim. A dependent claim would incorporate all of the items that is found in the claim to which it refers to. So let's say you have claim 1, which is an independent claim, which is fairly broad. And then you have a claim 2, which is a dependent claim. It would refer to claim 1 and include all of the limitations found in claim 1 and any other additional limitations you might want to add. Now, this is kind of important. Claims can be written in a form that's kind of broad, or they can be specific. In general, you want to take kind of like the Goldilocks approach. If a claim is too specific, that means it's got too much specific details. It may not be very valuable because it can be easily designed around. On the other hand, if you make your claims too broad, it covers too many things, then it may not be patentable. So generally, the best portion is somewhere in the middle, where it's not too specific and not too broad. That's also one of the reasons for having a large number of claims, because some of the claims, like the independent claims, can be more general, and the dependent claims can be a little bit more specific. So that way you have a wide range of coverage that varies from the more general claims that provide you with more coverage to something that's more specific. And as a patent examiner, oftentimes my role is to determine at what point does the claims have enough specificity to be considered patentable. So there's generally two requirements in terms of patentability, and the first one is called novel, and the second one is called non-obvious. Novel means that whatever is recited in the claim is new. So for something to be patentable, you must be the inventor of the invention, and whatever is invented cannot have existed prior to you inventing it. Now, this leaves oftentimes a bit of a gap where there's a lot of very, very minor things that are different. And what we try to do is we like to have a little bit of breathing room between patents. So there's a secondary requirement called non-obviousness, which essentially means that in every field, there's a certain body of knowledge, certain things that people would do on a routine basis. And if your invention is merely something that is a little bit different, but probably would be something done on a routine basis, it would be considered obvious. So to use an example, let's say we're talking about something like a bicycle. In terms of someone who makes a bicycle, they would weld tubing, attach parts, and maybe paint the bicycle. So if your invention is merely something like a bigger bicycle, or maybe you've changed the color of the bicycle, these will be considered obvious differences, and these differences wouldn't be sufficient to warrant a patent. So let's use an example. This is an example of a vehicle. And notice that it's written as a single sentence, beginning with a capital and ending with a period. So the first line is what we call the preamble. So it says it's a vehicle comprising, it means it's made up of the various parts. So frame, wheels, seat, removable top portion. And so it's a listing of the parts that make up your invention, as well as how they're connected together. The analogy I often give to people is think of it sort of like a recipe. A recipe has got a list of ingredients and how these ingredients are put together. So when you're writing a claim, it is the essential parts of your invention and how they're put together. So this is an example of a claim that's too broad. So what do I mean by that? If we take a look at all the elements of the claim, we find that these elements are also found in something that already exists, which is kind of a wagon wheel. So it does have a frame. It does have first and second front wheels and first and second rear wheels that are aligned behind the front wheel. It has a seat, a removable top made of cloth, and each wheel rotates and is connected to a frame. So when you encounter that situation and examiner says what you've recited is not patentable because it's not new, what you can do is you can amend the claim by changing and adding language in an attempt to differentiate your invention from something that exists. Now, you can add anything that is found in the specification as you originally filed. You cannot alter the specification after it is filed. So therefore, it's very important when you're writing this specification to think about alternatives and to include as much detail as possible, because you may find that what you think is new and inventive might actually exist already. So if there are other details you can add it to the claims, and therefore recite something that is patentable. It doesn't require a lot of differences. Any significant difference that is non-obvious would be sufficient to make something patentable. In this case, the applicant has added quite a few things: a motor, a yellow frame, hinged doors, glass windows, lights, and bumpers. It's not required that all of these differences be added, just one thing. Also be mindful that what you add essentially reduces the scope of your invention, and you essentially want to add only essential things as necessary. So in this case, you might want to think about whether you want to recite a yellow frame, because if you're defining your invention as a vehicle with a yellow frame, someone can merely make the same vehicle with an orange frame, and that would be considered different, and your patent would not protect you from someone making a vehicle with an orange frame. So some things to keep in mind before you're drafting claims. Have a clear idea of what is the invention and what are the pieces and parts that make up the invention. I would focus in on the essential parts and how the essential parts relate to each other. Sometimes an invention, a disclosure, an application can have more than one invention. Notice that if you remember earlier, we talked about a utility application can fall into 4 different categories, and it could be an apparatus, a machine, or a composition, and therefore your application may have more than one invention. It's also important to think strategically. What is the broadest claim you can recite? You might want to recite a variety of scope of claims from broad to narrow. And you should think about this at the time of filing, because if you leave some details out, you can't add them back later on during the prosecution. And think also about different things that might be very similar to your invention and how they would be different than your invention, so you can focus in on making differences in distinction between existing items and your invention. As I recited earlier, you can have up to 3 independent claims and 20 total claims. Should you require more, you can pay an additional fee at any time during your application. But generally, 20 claims are usually more than sufficient to define an invention if written well. So getting back to claims, we talked about the preamble, which is the introduction, but it usually is followed by what we call a transitional phrase. And there are 2 different ones, comprising, which is considered open-ended, or the term consisting of, which is called close-ended. Why is that important? Well, when you're defining an invention, it includes things that are not recited. That's what's called open-ended. So the purpose of that is that someone cannot just take your invention and add something to it and say, well, this is different, and your patent does not cover it. There are situations where you want a claim to only cover things that are recited. For example, let's say you have a chemical compound. If you add any additional elements to a chemical compound, it probably wouldn't work. So under those type of inventions, you usually would use the consisting language. But for most other inventions, let's say a bicycle or something of that nature, you would use the term comprising, which would include any other additions to the claims that would be covered by the claims. And finally, the claim includes the body, which recites the elements of your invention and how they're connected together. So once again, it's important to know the distinction between the term comprising or comprises, which is open-ended. It encompasses all of the listed elements and include anything else you can find under the sun. If you use the term consisting of, it's closed-ended, and your claim or your claimed invention would only cover the elements listed and no more. So under that type of scenario, someone can add an element to whatever is being claimed, and the patent would not protect you against that modification. So some good practices in terms of drafting claims. You should particularly point out and distinctly claim the subject matter that is the invention. So you should focus in on the inventive aspect and not spend as much time on things that are not critical to the invention. You may consider drafting your claims first before you write the specification, but that's kind of a preference. You use what works for you. I would recommend that whenever you look at your claims, also look at your drawings to make sure that each and every element in the claim is also found in the drawing. You should review the claims with the specification to make sure that the terms you use in the claims are also found in the specification. What is often suggested is that you take a look at some patents in the same field of technology to use consistent terminology, which is usually more easily understandable, as well as may actually better define your invention. And you should think carefully about what legal protections you need in your patent application, and draft your claims accordingly. So, in some situations, if your invention is very new and there's not much around similar to it, you should think about how you can draft your claims in a very broad fashion. However, if your invention is merely an improvement and there's lots of other inventions close to it, then you should maybe draft a claim that's more narrow, that has the focus and emphasis on the differences from things that are existing. Some things to avoid. Do not draft claims that cover two statutory classes. So, for example, one class might be an apparatus and another class might be a method of making it. So in that case, you should have one independent claim that covers the apparatus and a second independent claim that covers the method. You shouldn't write a claim that tries to cover both categories. It's also important that you use consistent terms both within the claim and in the specification. So if you mean the same terms or the same items, use the same terminology throughout the claim as well as throughout the specification. Claims are written as one sentence, so it shouldn't be written as multiple sentences. And you should only refer to another claim if you are intending to incorporate all of the limitations found in the prior claim. And do not replace elements from another claim in a dependent claim, because a dependent claim always includes all of the elements of the claim it refers to. This is a list of some resources that is very useful for you. I would suggest you look at the microentity link. This can reduce your filing fees quite significantly, and generally requires filling out a form and understanding the requirements. Requirements are pretty basic. Your income should be less than 3 times the average. It works out to something about 200,000, and you should have filed less than 4 previous applications. So if you haven't filed patent before and your income is generally under 200,000, you can file the micro entity form and reduce your fees by about 75%. There's no other proof requirement. Generally, it's an honor system, and it's up to you to read and follow the rules. There's also a link here to the Inventor Assistance Center, as well as Pro Bono Clinic, and these are some information that can further guide you in terms of filing a patent. And there's also a link here for inventors and entrepreneurial resources. You can also call the Office of Innovation Development. This is a hotline that is manned by patent examiners like myself that can answer some basic questions on patents. What they can't do is they can't give you legal advice. And that concludes our presentation for today.
So Albert, we had quite a few people asking for examples of well-written claims and things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, I was telling them like it really varies depending on your subject matter and the type of patent. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to just kind of clearly stating the core portions of your invention, what you find is novel and inventive. Do you have anything else to build on with that?
Claims are pretty difficult. They're usually the hardest part of writing an application, simply because people kind of lack experience. What I generally suggest is that you make a list of the critical elements, and when you're writing the claim, connect the elements together so that it is clear how the parts interrelate to each other. I guess the best example is look at some other patent applications, as well as a self-help book, which can give you some more information in terms of how claims are written. I guess that would be my basic recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, that's all our questions for now then.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions before we hop off of here? I think we're good. Albert and Chris, I thank you both for the presentation, and Chris for handling all those questions. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's session. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides. So all of those resources will be in an email follow-up coming out in the next few days. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we hope to see you at the next session. And before we go, I see some questions popping in. Chris, I don't know if you're taking a look at those or not.
It's just more thank you. So
Okay,
not any more
wonderful.
questions, but thank you guys,
Wonderful.
and thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you all. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and happy Valentine's Day. Bye-bye.
Okay. The other thing I'd like to mention is that I think I will provide an email address so that if someone has a question they would like to ask me at a later date, I'll be happy to answer them also.
That's great. We'll make sure that's in the follow-up email. Thank you.
All right, bye.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.